Hi everyone, today our goal is I can multiply a fraction by a fraction using visual models. For this first problem, I just want you to watch and listen as I share my thinking and solve the problem. So for our first problem, we have the expression 1/5 times 3/4. What I'm going to do first here is represent 3/4 because we have 1/5 of 3/4. So I will take a large section and break it into fourths. So now I have a large strip of fourths. And I'm going to represent my 3/4 by shading them in green. Now I've shaded in my 3/4 green. And what I'm going to do now is, because I have 1/5 of 3/4, now I'm going to take each fourth and split it into 5 parts, or make it into fifths. So now each fourth will have 5 parts. When I look at my whole of 3/4 originally, that's 4/4, and each of those fourths is split into 5 parts. So now in total, I have a total of 20 parts. Now I'm taking 1/5 of 3/4. Now I'm going to take 1/5 of each of those 3/4. So I'll shade this in yellow so we can see the difference here. So I have 1/5 of that 3/4, as well as 1/5 of that 3/4, and 1/5 of that 3/4. So now what I have is I had 3/4 originally, but I was taking 1/5 of 3/4. And when I did that, I split all of my fourths into fifths, which gave me 20 parts in the whole. So that means we have 20 parts in the whole. And then I shaded each of those fourths. I had 1/5 of each of those fourths. So that gave me 1, 2, 3 shaded parts of my 20. So 1/5 times 3/4 equals 3/20. For this next problem, I'd like you to solve it along with me in your journal, so make sure you're prepared with all your materials. If you're not, pause the video and return when you are ready. So for this expression, we have 2/3 times 3/8. So when we represent that visually, when we're representing a multiplication problem, I like to make my fraction strips or fraction bars larger because you're doing more with them when you're multiplying. You're multiplying the fraction bars so there's many more parts in your whole in the end. So I'll first represent my eighths, and remember, eighths can be quite easy. We just split in half, and then each of those halves in half. So on one side we have 4, and then the other half will do the same. So now we have 8 total parts, relatively equal, and we'll have 3/8 of those 8 total parts represented, 3 of the 8 represented. Remember, at any point, if you need to catch up with these drawings or visual models, please just pause the video and do so. So now we have 3/8 represented. Now we're taking 2/3 of 3/8. So what we'll do is we'll break each eighth into 3 parts. So we can go straight across all 8 of those parts, and we'll do that again. So now each of those eighths is broken into thirds. That gives us a total in our whole, a total of 24 parts. Now what we're doing when we have 2/3 of 3/8, we would take, and we'll shade again. I'll shade in yellow this time. When you're using your pencil, just do cross shading so you can see the difference. So I'm going to take 1 of my eighths, and I'm going to shade 2/3 of it. So I'm going to shade 2/3 of each of those eighths. That will give me 2/3 of 1/8, and 2/3 of 2/8, and finally 2/3 of 3/8. So here you can see that we had 24 parts in our whole, because we took our eighths and broke them into thirds, and of those 24 parts, 6 of them are now shaded, so we have 6 24ths because we have 2/3 of each of our 3/8. For this last problem, I'd like you to evaluate 3/4 times 2/3 using a visual model. So please pause the video, and when you finish, come back and check your work. So I've created a fraction bar of thirds. I have 2 of those thirds shaded. Since we have 3/4 of 2/3, I've now multiplied my thirds by fourths, so now each third has 4 parts. That now gives me a new total of 12 parts in my whole. Since we have 3/4 of 2/3, or 3/4 times 2/3, I took each of my thirds that now have 4 parts in each third, and I shaded 3 of those 4 parts, as you can see here, 3 of those 4, and I did that 2 times because we have 2/3 there. So that gives me a total of 6 shaded parts. And remember, since we broke our thirds into fourths, we had a new total of 12. So we had 12 parts in our whole, and 6 of them are being used. So 3/4 times 2/3, or 3/4 of 2/3, is 6/12. That can also be simplified as 3/6 or 1/2.